Washington Journal continues.
Joining us, two familiar faces in the Washington scene. David Frum, a co-founder of No Labels, also the former speechwriter and special assistant to President George W. Bush, and William Galston, also a co-founder, the former deputy assistant to President Clinton for domestic policy. To both of you gentlemen, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Good to be here.
How would you frame No Labels in a sentence of what you're trying to do?
It's an effort to change the tone and the conduct of our nation's politics so that the big problems that we have can be addressed successfully despite the division of power between the political parties.
And Mr. Frum, why this effort as opposed to others that have taken on this cause over the years?
Well, I think we are, it's always true. People say it was worse now than it was under the last administration, and during the last administration people say, well, it's worse than ever today. And my response is, they're all right. It's worse each time. We are arriving at a point of institutional breakdown, of the inability of American government to work. Now, we've had this happen before, but never at a time when the economic problems were so serious. So the fact that you can't get a governor of the Federal Reserve Board confirmed, in 1997, that's an amusing little annoyance. But in 2010 and 2011, it truly is a critical crisis. I'll say one more thing. I worked in the Bush administration. And I mean, just the things that were said about President Bush were so enraging and outrageous and unfair. And I know there are a lot of my friends and colleagues who were around at that time who said, boy, we cannot wait to serve as we were served. And my reaction to that experience is, I just want no part of this ever again. And the way that politics was done then, that shouldn't be the template for how it's going to be done forever. That should be a warning of how it must stop.
So as far as a template is concerned, Mr. Galston, what would you advise then going forward, especially since you're dealing with three, in our usual case, Republicans, Democrats, and independents, and trying to get some type of consensus to get things done?
Well, number one, as the name of our organization suggests, No Labels, we're not asking people to forget about the fact that they're Democrats, Republicans, or independents, that they have views, that they have commitments, that they have principles. We are asking them to do two things. Number one, stop demonizing one another. Understand that we're all Americans, we're all in this together, and we're not going to get out of it until we all work together. And number two, rather than focusing on the differences, which are there, which are important, why don't we start with what we have in common and try to build out from there? That would really change the tone and conduct of our politics if we asked that question and put that question in the forefront of our thinking.
So what's the main thing that all these groups have in common? Is it the economy?
Well, that's the boat we're all in, isn't it? And it's pretty leaky right now. And not only that, our competitors are eating our lunch while we're squabbling over the seats at the table. It used to be that time was on America's side, and we could afford to waste time. We were preeminent. We were unchallenged. That's simply not true anymore, and I think most Americans understand that we're in a tough, new, competitive world, and if we're not moving ahead, we're falling behind.
So, Mr. Frum, as far as getting folks to set aside labels, so to speak, and come together on issues that are important, how do you make that work practically?
Well, I can tell you what I do in my work. I run a website, which I've modestly named after myself, Frum Forum, and we talk every day about, from a Republican point of view, how do you have a more effective system of government? How do you make things work? How do you think through the political decisions that Republicans have to make with a view not to causing maximum havoc to the other side, but actually making some improvements? Can Republicans think about ways to, within our political philosophy, strengthen environmental protections, within our political philosophy to raise middle-class incomes, to deal with inequality and poverty, to enhance the strength and power of the nation and individual liberty? Can we do those things within our tradition? Can we have an affirmative agenda that offers more than just anti-liberalism criticism of liberals, which is unfortunately what you get from a lot of the other so-called conservative sides?
Our guests are with us for an hour, and if you want to ask them questions about their effort and related issues, 202-737-0001 for Republicans, 202-737-0002 for Democrats, 202-628-0205 for Independents, and also if you want to reach us for email, journal@cspan.org is how you do that, and you can also reach us via Twitter at twitter.com/cspanwj. Did the efforts that were made in the lame duck and the accomplishments that were done there, is that a good example of what you're ultimately trying to achieve?
Well, it was certainly a start in the right direction. And I think a lot of people were surprised that the administration and congressional Republicans were able to come together, and many Democrats as well in Congress, on the question of taxes. Now, obviously that's not a permanent solution, the deal that was worked out, but the fact that there could be that kind of agreement at all, I think was an encouraging sign. And let me give you another encouraging sign while we're about it. The conventional wisdom about the President's Deficit Commission was that it would get absolutely nowhere. Well, it did a lot better than that, because you had the very rare Washington phenomenon of certified liberals like Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois and certified conservatives like Senator Tom Coburn from Oklahoma, who was once known as Dr. No, actually saying yes to the same thing. That's what we're looking for. They didn't leave their principles at the door when they sat down at that table to talk about our fiscal future, but they found a way forward together. That's what we want.
The commission, though, most of the folks there even rejected its principles, didn't it?
Actually, that's not true. There were 18 commissioners. 11 said yes to the plan. Now, technically, 14 were required, and you don't get 14 out of 18 people in Washington, D.C. saying yes on a joint plan for where to have lunch. Mm-hmm. Okay, but the fact that you had most of the senators from both political parties, these are elected officials now, not appointees, signing on to the plan was surprising and encouraging, and it provides a foundation on which future fiscal discussions can be built.
So talk a little bit about the mechanics of no labels. Where do you go from the formal opening that you had last week?
Well, here's what I would like to see happening. And this is a very loose group, and I don't know that it has a lot of the traditional apparatus of executive control and leadership, so I speak only for myself. One, I think we need to have a change in the expectations of Americans as users and participants in politics. That every institution we've built over the past 30 years has, I shouldn't say every, but so many of them have existed to empower the angriest minorities. It is not, but it's not a fact of nature that that has to be so. It didn't used to be so. So you can make institutional changes in the way Congress works, in the way primaries work, in the culture of what is acceptable. You know, it has always been true, for example, it's always been true that, or as long as anybody can remember, that by courtesy, the leaders of the Senate would allow an individual senator to block an appointment that he or she did not like. And senators would use that power occasionally, but it's happening more and more often. That's a cultural change. The weapon was there, it's just getting used more and more. Now, you can either have a cultural change where people say, you know, this is destructive, we will use this weapon less and less. You can have an institutional change where the weapon gets taken away. This power is not in the Constitution, it's not in the law, it's not even in the rules of the Senate, it's just a courtesy of the Senate.
I wonder if I could add to that, Pedro. No Labels is a grassroots movement. At our launch event in New York, we had 1,000 citizens from all 50 states who paid their own way because they cared so much about the future of the country. We have a plan, and the plan is to organize citizens groups in all 435 congressional districts. Those groups are there to monitor the behavior of their elected officials, to hold them to account. If they start demonizing each other and if they appear to be part of the problem rather than part of the solution. We're going to have town halls in the states throughout the country that have the greatest density of independents. And that's our plan for 2011. And in 2012, we're going to start to flex our muscles.
So start working with the independents. Is that the strategy then?
No, start working with everybody. But focusing initially on states that have the greatest density of independents, because they are a loud but underestimated voice in American politics.
How do you ultimately gauge success for this effort?
Well, how do you gauge success for anything in politics? Do things get better? Do you see steady changes and improvements that allow you to look backward and say, you know, things are a little better than they used to be before? I think it's very dangerous to imagine that change happens as a result of dramatic events, or even necessarily by changing the personalities in politics, that you can have the same people behaving in better or worse ways. And we have, I think, invested a lot over the past 30 years, a lot of hope that you can change the culture by changing the personality. The culture of Washington ends up altering the personality to suit itself.
Gauging change?
I think the American people will be the ultimate judges. Right now, trust in government is at historically low levels. Trust in the Congress is hardly measurable. It's so low. And this is very bad for our democracy. If those numbers start to move back up, then we'll see that something positive is happening.
Our guest with us for an hour. Your chance to talk to them. Rapid River, Michigan, a Republican line. Pete, good morning.
Good morning. I'm kind of curious, maybe they can answer when I get off the phone, how they came up with the name No Labels. It just seems ridiculous to me, you know. I guess I tend to lean more towards the Tea Party people. I think they are a lot of independent people, and they're monitoring and having meetings, and I think this is something like the coffee party, which didn't work out very well either. And you know, I look at labels. There are groups inside the parties who try to be stealthy, and I think we probably all have read David Horowitz's book Radical Son. So we know what these people have done and changed their names over the years. And Glenn Beck is getting it out there to the masses. And I think we need to identify people and label them who they are, and not let them be stealthy. And that's my opinion.
Mr. Frum, you want to start?
Well, let me start. You know, one of the changes that has come to the conservative world in my active life, I've been involved in conservative politics since the election of 1980, has been, when I started, conservatives had a coherent program of reform and change that was aimed at upgrading living standards, making the economy more competitive, deregulation of industry, reduction of taxes, strengthening of national defense. We've implemented a great part of that program, and it's yielded incredible results, and that is the great conservative achievement. I think our inventory is a little thin these days, and the result of it is that instead of offering people a program, what we too often do, and the people in the caller unfortunately admires are an example of this. We offer them excuses, explanations, things that have gone wrong, finger pointing, theories about how the assistant Secretary of Transportation for Traffic, when he was in college, studied with this professor, and that tells you everything you need to know about the direction of the Obama administration. I mean, that is not the way people who want to govern the country think. When we look at the Middle East and we see the conspiracy theories prevalent in that part of the world, we understand that as a product of the failure of the politics of those societies, because if they were successful, they would have programs to offer in competitive elections to help people. And that is the direction that republicanism needs to go. I don't think of No Labels as being an invitation to me to cease to be a conservative or Republican. It's a way for me to join with others to change the rules of the game so that we can be more effective in the next 10 years than we were, unfortunately, as Republicans in the last 10 years.
Plymouth, Wisconsin. You are next. Kurt, Independent Line.
Good morning, and thank you for C-SPAN. I watched the forum on this No Labels thing, and the question I have is simple. Where were you in 2006 when Nancy Pelosi said, "We won, too bad"? All of a sudden, 2010, the Democrats get thumped. Now all of a sudden these groups come up. We're not going to believe any of you. I've been to every Tea Party meeting that's been held within 50 miles of my home. I intend to keep going. There you will find Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, Independents. Everybody comes to them, and they're all disgusted with exactly what's behind you in that building. And that's what we're going to change. God bless you all. God bless America, and have a great day.
Mr. Galston.
Well, first of all, my hat's off to the Tea Party movement. It is a genuine grassroots movement. It has mobilized a lot of energy, a lot of discontent, and Americans who want to change the way things are going and make things better have been the lifeblood of our country from the very beginning. No labels is no different. We are Democrats, Republicans, independents, discontented with the way things are going, and trying to find a way forward in very difficult times. And I would ask you, sir, and people watching this program, to suspend your disbelief. We are in very mistrustful times. David Frum just talked about conspiracy theories. The air is filled with them. Let's try to cool the temperature a little bit and focus on the real problems that we confront. The real problems that we confront are not our political adversaries. They are tough economic problems, tough educational problems, tough foreign policy problems, a competitive posture in the world that is slipping, an educational system which, according to international tests, is not performing up to world-class standards. That's the ball to keep our eye on. And not demonizing one another.
I'll let you both respond to this. It's off of Twitter from Susan, who adds, at this point, gridlock is a good thing as it slows down rash decisions based on political food fight.
That's something you hear a lot, and let me give you a very concrete example of how it's not true. We're in the throes of this terrible, terrible economic downturn. Beginning in the summer of 2009, there were some signs of hope that things were getting better. The economy did strengthen through the fall of 2009 into the earliest part of 2010. Sometime around the spring of 2010, that improvement stopped and the economy slipped backward into reverse through the summer. Why did that happen? There's a lot of debate, but let me point to one thing that is a very powerful indicator, which is that in April of 2010, the Federal Reserve decided the economy had enough liquidity and it stopped making more. Now, why did the Federal Reserve stop providing leadership? Well, at that same time, the Federal Reserve didn't even have a quorum. There are 4 of 7 governors on the board of the Federal Reserve, and the additional governors could not be appointed. The president named them. There was a majority in the Senate to confirm them, but individual senators, in fact, in one case, just one senator, said this person is not going to have a vote. Because that governor did not get a vote, the Federal Reserve was able to fell into a much more paralytic approach. They stopped providing liquidity to the economy. The economy stopped growing in April, and we fell into a summer of wasted time and discontent. The government has to function, and the idea that you are better off by paying for this giant entity, which has a series of important functions to do, and then having them not do them, even though you're paying for them, I think that's just an illusion. That is a very costly, painful thing. The work of the government, I will agree with the implied view of that writer. The government undertakes too much, but that is not to say that the things that government is asked to do, it has to do, are unimportant things. They need to happen.
Mr. Galston, what would you add?
Well, we have unemployment close to 10% still. Underemployment is closer to 20%. We have a federal budget deficit of more than $1 trillion each year, and the long-term projections are horrible. Gridlock is not going to solve those problems. I'm sorry. Obviously, nobody's in favor of rash action, and our political system was set up, designed by James Madison and others not to be liable to rash action. But we do need to act.
Springfield, thanks for Virginia. Thanks for waiting. Barbara, Democrats line. Go ahead.
Yes, this is James from Tennessee.
Oh, James, go ahead. James, you're on. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Sir, you're on the air. Just go ahead.
Okay. Yes, I would like to say that the Republican Party and the Tea Party and Fox News networks are all one, and their sole purpose is to get Barack Obama out of office, and they're going to do everything they can if it hurts the people in the United States to get him out of office. Thank you.
Let's go straight to...
Yeah. Look, I will be voting against Barack Obama, I assume, in 2012, and I would also like to get him out of office. But you have to have more than that. You have to have some plan of what you will do once you have the responsibility of governing yourself. And we have seen in the last spell of Republican governance, which I voted for and supported and participated in, what happens if you arrive in power and don't have a clear idea of what you want to do. And by the way, a lot of what went wrong in the Obama administration comes from that same problem, that they arrived in office in 2009, and they did not adapt their program to the facts. That they inherited this terrible, terrible recession. But great sympathy to them for that. But clearly, in their thinking, that dealing with the recession was a secondary concern to other agenda items that they had that they made more primary, and that's another cause of a lot of our current problems. We need a politics where the parties are less responsive to their most militant minorities and more responsive to the general public. And there are institutional changes and cultural changes that we can make. Changes in the way primaries work, changes in the way districting works, changes in the way campaign finance work, that would make politics more responsive to the concerns of the middle 85% of the country, not just the extremist 15%.
From Gulfport, Mississippi, Richard, Republican line.
Good morning. And I want to thank you for C-SPAN. We know why no labels came up. It came up because people are on to liberal, people are on to progressive, people are on to every term these career politicians and career pundits have used. So now they're down to no labels because they don't want you to know their true belief. They just going to say no labels, and I'm just a good old boy. I'm just an American. We don't want you to know I'm progressive or liberal or socialist. I'm just one of these good old boys with no label. Well, most folks out here understand what you're doing. Thank you, and have a good day.
Well, I get called a lot of names. I don't know that people very often call me a liberal. I started my political work in 1980 on the giving out flyers and knocking on doors for Ronald Reagan in a college town that wasn't very pro-Republican. Although we did win the congressional seat. We did win that year. We didn't hold it, but we won it. And I was in the Bush administration, and I've spent my life and career in conservative politics. So if no labels is a stalking horse for some kind of liberal agenda, they've made a very, very big mistake by including me.
Can I throw in the opinions of Frank Rich, which you've probably read on your effort, to which he said...
I've even written about that.
To which he said this, just part of what he said. He said, what's most disturbing about no labels is that its centrist, no doubt well-intentioned leaders seem utterly clueless about why Americans of all labels are angry. The realization that both parties are bought off by special interests who game the system and stack it against the rest of us. Indeed, no labels itself is another manifestation of the syndrome. He goes on to talk about being started by Mr. Mark McKinnon, a veteran of the Bush administration and McCain campaigns, as well as Nancy Jacobson, who was married to Mark Penn and worked for Hillary Clinton. But what do you make of the intent, or at least the accusation?
Well, as I've written, I think it's an unfortunate accusation because it really doesn't pay attention to what this movement is about and why people are so interested in participating in it. Why are people flocking to our Facebook page? Why did 1,000 ordinary Americans come to New York City from every state in the country at their own expense? Why is spontaneous organizing cropping up in states around the country? This is not being done out of some mysterious directorate in Washington, D.C. We have hardly any money, right? And the people who got interested in this movement early on could fit around this table. We don't have the power to do anything unless the people are interested in what we're trying to do, and they are. Now, I agree with Mr. Rich that people are fed up, and I don't think he's entirely wrong to suggest that they're fed up, because a lot of people feel underrepresented or unrepresented in our nation's politics the way it's now being conducted. So can Mr. Rich and I, rather than throwing grenades at one another from our respective foxholes, agree on that proposition and move forward together now that we've gotten our respective spleen out of our system? I certainly hope so.
To his point about special interest, then, how are you funded?
How the group is funded, how I am funded. I mean,
well, the group. How's the group funded?
The group is funded. I've never seen any money being spent in the group, so I don't know that there are any actual funds. But I think the people paid their own way. I think that some of the early founders of the group have generously put some small amounts of money of their own into it. Bill, you will know better than I don't think there are any corporate contributions. I don't think there are any business contributions to the group.
I'm really not sure, but I can tell you there are no big contributions to the group, because my understanding is that our total spending in the first year of our existence was less than $1 million, which is trivial by the standards of modern organizations. And I can tell you that the people who are participating in it as volunteers are not getting a dime for their services. I have never gotten a penny for all of the hours that I've contributed, and I know that others who have contributed their hearts and souls and time to the movement are doing it on a gratis volunteer basis.
Yeah, I've spoken at No Labels events outside of Washington, Chicago, and other places, and I've paid my own transportation expenses, for example.
David Frum, Bill Galston joining us to talk about the work of No Labels. Jackson, Mississippi, Independent Line. Charlie, good morning.
Yes, the United States is looked upon, as just Americans, kind of like you guys are saying. And, we've got an empire, just like the Ottomans, just like the Romans, just like the British. And world empires are expensive, and citizens are taxed heavily. And that's some of the problem we face. It's not just the welfare state, it's we've got an empire. We got to pay for it.
Well, there is a big debate among scholars as to whether we have an empire or not, and there are many who agree with you, sir. But for sure, we have global responsibilities. For example, the United States Navy is the principal force guaranteeing freedom of the seas around the world. And in so doing, we are facilitating the flow of global commerce, which is really the lifeblood of the world economy. And nations around the world are very eager for us to continue to play this role, because the alternative is a return to anarchy. And yes, it is expensive. And there are many Americans who wish, and I think correctly, that more of the countries around the world who are benefiting from what we're doing around the world would pay something closer to their fair share. And this has been a major goal of American foreign policy for decades. It's never made very much progress. And as Americans, I think we need to make a choice. Are we willing to continue to pay for the position of global leadership that we now occupy? Or would we like other powers like the Chinese to step up and do it in our place? I know what I think, but there's room for legitimate debate as to whether this policy should continue.
Rick in Fort Wayne, Indiana, Democrats Line, good morning.
Good morning, and thanks for C-SPAN. I'm an optimistic person because I believe that a problem given enough time and mind, solutions will come into focus. But I see a problem and I go into problem-solving mode. The mind automatically does that. Our political leaders, some of our political leaders will look at the same problem and they see blood. They see what harm they can do to the opposing party. And they are in conflict mode. So I don't think we can get there from here until there's a mindset shift in our political leaders. I'll give you an example. Mitch McConnell, as soon as the political race was over, this last one came out and said his number one priority was to get rid of Barack Obama. That surprised me because I thought the number one priority were jobs. So that's the mindset that they are in. I'd like to know, what is the cost of our third war costing the taxpayer, the war that's happening on the Hill? We've already had collateral damage from it, loss of homes, loss of jobs, the muck and mire of the financial system.
Caller, we'll leave it there. And if I may, to the caller's first point about political leaders and how they respond to this idea, we had Senator John McCain on the floor, and one of the things that he talked about was the notion of compromise, especially amongst political parties. So I'll have you listen to what he has to say and then get your response.
There's a lot of talk about compromise. There's a lot of talk about working together. You think what this bizarro world that the majority leader has been carrying us in of cloture votes on this, votes on various issues that are on the political agenda of the other side, is somehow think that beginning next January 5th, we will all love one another and kumbaya? I don't think so.
A harbinger of next 112th?
Well, we'll see. Here's the thing that I took away from the lame duck session that I found most encouraging. President Obama, having had this defeat, had a decision to make. How would he respond to it? Now, one of the ways to respond, and I think it's the way that President Clinton responded after his defeat, is to get very tactical. To create a lot of traps for the opponents, to put them in a position where that you present them with votes that are booby-trapped with danger. You give them things that they say they want, but you connect them to things that they really can't abide. And you can do a lot of damage to the other side, but you destroy your reputation for dealing in good faith. And that is also what happened to the Clinton administration, that he managed to persuade the Republicans that he was just so untrustworthy that there was no dealing with him. That does not seem to have happened this time. There was some temptation to do so. Early on, for example, repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which was a measure that attracted what was over 70 votes in the Senate, that was linked early on to abortion provisions that the Democrats knew to be utterly unacceptable to the Republicans. They severed them and gave a clean vote on Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And we saw what happened, that there was a large latent majority for this thing if presented in a non-tactical way. And we'll see whether the president opts to continue to negotiate. He is in a more powerful position than Bill Clinton was in 1995, so he has a little bit more leeway. The country's problems are much more serious than they were in 1995, so the requirement is clear. But every day there are moments in Washington to prove good faith or bad faith, and each day sets up the next day according to the behavior of the last.
And before we go to you, Mr. Galston, let me play one more clip then of President Obama, and I believe this is from the press conference before he left for vacation, talking about the larger idea of working with Republicans.
I will be happy to see the Republicans test whether or not I'm itching for a fight on a whole range of issues. I suspect they will find I am. And I think the American people will be on my side on a whole bunch of these fights.
Mr. Galston, going forward on the larger issue of trying to get folks to work together, especially when you have partisan issues that do prop up when talking about policy.
Well, we'll see, won't we? And we'll begin to see in earnest when President Obama delivers his 2011 State of the Union address. That will lay down the template, the path forward as he sees it for the next 2 years of the country and his administration. My prediction is that after thinking through strategy, policies, and tactics, he will decide that the path of cooperation is the best both for the country and for him personally. And if he's as smart as I think he is, he will come to the following conclusion. If I get to the high ground and then stretch out my hand and invite everybody else to join me here, if they grasp my hand, good for the country and good for me. If they spurn my outstretched hand, well, then the country can see for itself where the real obstacle is. While I have the floor, and just to show that no labels is not without internal discord, as a former Clintonian, I just have to say for the record that I don't accept that account of what happened during the Clinton administration. In fact, the record will show that in 1996 and 1997, very important agreements were reached across party lines on issues ranging from welfare to our fiscal future. And so apparently the majority of the Republican Party during that period reached a very different conclusion, namely that Bill Clinton was someone they could do business with, and they did. And so I, for one, do not shudder at the thought that we might return to the mid and late 1990s, which I think history will record were not a bad time for our country. But just to show you that we're not all on the same page.
But what about State of the Union and Mr. Galston's thoughts on that?
I've got an article coming out in the next issue of Esquire magazine where I actually go through a thought experiment of what should the president say given who he is and where he's studying from.
Picture too?
Do I get a picture of me? No,
yeah, this being Esquire magazine.
I don't think any print publication can afford to do that kind of damage to its sales
you're a
these
famously well-dressed conservative.
So I have a lot of thoughts about what he's likely to say and what he should say. What I agree with Bill, that is what he should say. He is going to be fighting an overwhelming temptation to get tactical, to spring traps. And there are a lot of traps that a president is able to spring, that in any battle between a president and Congress, the president's got the inherent advantage of unity focus. He's in the end, he runs a much bigger organization, but he's a single decision maker at the top. It's easier for him to coordinate than it is for the members of Congress who have their rivalries. So that is a real temptation. I hope he'll resist.
Brunswick, Maine, Republican line. John, thanks for waiting.
Thanks, gentlemen. Just a couple of comments. First, the Federal Reserve is not responsible for growth. What they've been responsible for are debt-fueled inflationary bubbles that eventually burst, and then the American people are left to suffer the consequences. Secondly, what we've been telling you is not that we don't want gridlock. We don't want Washington getting more and more powerful, bigger and bigger, creeping further and further into our lives, spending more and more money. I welcome gridlock. Just as Christmas Eve, an omnibus bill was passed, and in that bill was a provision for the FDA to regulate all food growing in the U.S., including if I'm a local grower just selling to my neighbors. We don't want you people in our lives anymore. We want gridlock. Thanks, gentlemen.
Can I say something about that?
Please.
One of the real barriers to effective conservatism is conservatives do not understand, do not appreciate how much they have won over the past, well, really since the middle 1970s. And if we were to look back half a century, 1960, the year I was born, it was illegal to own gold. It was illegal to own a telephone. We had the federal government regulated every rail line, every airfare, every truck route in the country. It regulated how you could ship. It regulated the price of every kind of telecommunication service. It regulated what could be said on the airwaves. The scope of government it is in almost every way smaller today than it was in 1960. And if conservatives would ever absorb that, I think they could be less apocalyptic about their possibilities in politics. Because conservatives have succeeded by political organization in the past, and not just in stopping things, but in doing things, it should be possible for them to do so in the future as well. And I wish the caller would review the recent history of conservative accomplishment and feel that kind of optimism that makes him think that there is something better to do as a conservative in Washington than simply stopping things from getting done.
For David Frum and Bill Galston, Fort Ann, New York. Pam on our Democrats line.
In order to get the vitriol out of our public dialogue and political dialogue, I think you have to get the money out. And given the recent Citizens United decision, that doesn't look likely. But I think Americans would cheer any political group that got together and started pushing a limit on the time that elections take place. Like in England, I think they have 6 weeks or something like that. Boy, would we love a shorter campaign season, number one. And number two, I think you should promote possibly a turn cable off, except for C-SPAN Day, several times a month, because it is the cable channels where citizens are being thrown to the lions on a daily basis, and as Americans, we're sitting around and with bloodthirst watching what you people do to each other. So I think promoting a hit to their ratings is one of the only ways to get it to stop. Thanks for taking my call.
Mr. Galston.
Well, let me give you a no-labels perspective on all that. First of all, we don't we don't begin here in Washington with a no labels agenda that we're asking citizens around the country to sign up to. Our hope is that through these citizens groups that are going to be organized in all 435 congressional districts, that an agenda will bubble up. Having said that, I can tell you, having attended our launch event in New York from beginning to end, having listened very carefully to what the citizens who came to that event were saying, it is clear to me that reform of the political system is high on their list, as it is on yours and as it should be on the list of Americans. There's no question about the fact that our institutional structure, starting as David Frum said, with the way that we establish congressional districts, but also the way we finance campaigns, is not working correctly, and it is certainly not increasing confidence in our governing institutions, confidence which is now at near historically low levels. And so I share your hope that citizens across the country are going to develop a robust agenda of political and institutional reform and carry that forward into our nation's politics.
As far as your organization is concerned, are there a set of principles that you're looking for as far as the end result of people coming together, specific things you're looking for?
Well, our principles are very simple. Number one, stop demonizing your opposition, whoever your opposition is. Number two, search for common ground. Number three, be in problem-solving mode. And number four, put the country first. And beyond that, it's up to the citizens to come together around solutions. And that's why the local organizing is going to be the principal focus for 2011. We don't need one more Washington-centered, Washington-driven agenda. We need a citizen-focused, citizen-centered agenda, citizen-generated agenda, and that's what we're going to try to provide the arena for over the next 12 months.
Can I pick up something that the caller said about cable news? Look, there's obviously a big food fight atmosphere to a lot of cable news other than C-SPAN. But I worry a lot more, not about the 3 million people who watch, or 5 million people, whatever it is, who watch a lot of cable TV and get too much, if slanted, political information. I worry about the 125 million people who get much less political information than their parents and grandparents did. We are moving toward a world in which the best informed Americans are so much better informed than they were a generation ago, but in which many, many Americans are much worse informed. And it's that kind of, if you can call it, information oligarchy that is one of the powerful destructive forces in American politics, because it is if you don't know what's going on, you will be taken advantage of. And that is the backdrop to the financial crisis, that all kinds of decisions were made that just seemed too technical and too boring for people to follow, but on which trillions of dollars turned. So I would say the object should not be to get people to turn their cable TV off. The object should be to find some way to persuade the 125 million people who do not watch enough political information to watch more.
How do you factor in then websites? How do you factor in political blogs? How do you factor in those things?
I think that's the minority within the minority. That is, that within the 5 million who watch a lot of cable, there are probably another 500,000 who also read a lot of blogs and who are really intensely well informed. If I think back to my parents' generation, my parents were very well-informed people. My father's still a very well-informed person. But in 1970, if you read a couple of daily papers and a news magazine or two and conscientiously watched the evening news and watched the special reports on the weekend, not only were you doing your part, you're getting about as much information as it was possible for you to get. Today, that would be barely an appetizer portion for the people who do it. On the other hand, in 1970, it was almost impossible to avoid the 6:30 news, even if you didn't want to watch it, because you had to get off the couch and turn it off and then do something for half an hour until the prime time began. Today, it's very easy to avoid, and a lot of people are avoiding it.
Grove City, Ohio. Richard on our independent line. Thanks for waiting. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, good morning. I was kind of curious about the whole labeling stuff and everything, because if my memory serves me correct, isn't Mr. Frum was a speechwriter for the Bush administration, and aren't you the person that came up with the term axis of evil and labeled a bunch of countries as evil, essentially? And aren't we still living the consequences, basically, of your labeling, essentially, and bankrupting this country?
Well, as Bill said earlier, we have some internal disagreements, and I have to say I'm not quite as peace-loving a temperament as some of my fellow no-label types. I do believe that sometimes when somebody takes a punch at you, you throw a punch back, and I believe that in international politics, and I believe that in domestic politics. I would argue more against inaccurate and irrational labeling than I would against labeling altogether. And sometimes, yeah, people have, a lot of people say to me, well, you sometimes say some pretty tough things, so what are you doing in this group? Well, sometimes tough things have to be said, and I think one of the real cyclic reasons behind the tendency toward extremism in our politics is that people who have, too often, people who have moderate views on issues also tend naturally to have that link to a moderate personality type. And so it sometimes happens that people of more extreme views and more extreme personality types will trample on them. And I think every once in a while, if you're going to stand up for some broad centrist points of view, with a conservative flavor in my case, you have to be willing to give as good as you get, and not to say, gee, I'm too moderate to defend myself, I'm too moderate to stand up for myself. I think both individuals and nations, when attacked, should do so.
Let me just add a word to that, because this is a widespread misinterpretation. No labels doesn't mean that people don't have political identities. And no labels is not asking people to shed those political identities if and when they choose to identify with our movement. It is asking them to think about a larger good that includes but also goes beyond their individual identities. I am a lifelong Democrat. I have been in 6 Democratic presidential campaigns. I served for 2.5 years in Bill Clinton's White House, and I'm proud of every minute of it. Having said that, I have never claimed that my party has a monopoly on either wisdom or virtue, and I have never believed that people on the other side of the of the aisle were evil. Sometimes I think some of them are misguided, and they no doubt think the same about me. We are not asking people to forget about the fact that they're Democrats, Republicans, independents, liberals, moderates, or conservatives. We're asking them to think a little harder about what it means to be an American and what it means to practice politics as an American, what it means to be an American citizen. That's all.
You know, maybe an analogy. Just before Christmas, everybody was talking about that New York Jets coach who tripped the player as he came off the field. And people thought that was a pretty reprehensible thing to do, by and large. Now, the question is, was that man not a good New York Jet? Is that criticism suggesting that you don't love the New York Jets, or you're not committed to the New York Jets? I mean, there are things that we don't do in competition. And because we understand that that doesn't help the competition, that doesn't make you stronger, that makes you weaker, that destroys the possibility of politics altogether. And I think that maybe the analogy I would say is a difference between playing as well as you can when you're on the field and tripping the players as they're running off.
James on our Republican line from Walker, Louisiana.
Good morning. Can we please stop calling Mr. Frum a conservative? A true conservative would never write an article advising the Republicans to support the Democratic health care bill because he said that the people, American people, were going to love it. Well, after November 2nd, it doesn't look like the American people like it so much. And let's take a look at all the waivers that the administration has granted. This previous or the pre-existing conditions fiasco where 8,000 people when they thought it was going to be 135,000 people signing up. And now they sneak this into life counseling back into the bill, in the dark of night. Do you still stand by that advice that the Republicans should support this health care? And do you really consider yourself a conservative with these kinds of policy positions? Okay, let me say, first of all, I'm sorry, caller, I respect you, but I cannot accept your claim to be the head of the membership committee of the conservative movement. I'm in, sorry, whether you like it or not. Second, if you read that piece I wrote, Waterloo, in the spring of 2010, that is so, I look back at myself and I'm amazed at how accurate it was. What I said then was this: Republicans bet
everything on stopping the health care bill. They refused to try to introduce their ideas into it because they were so confident they could stop it. And I said, I've been saying through 2009, you're not going to be able to stop it, so you better try to fix it. Republicans did not do that, and the result was the health care bill got passed into law. And this idea that the people who rejected my advice were more opposed to the health care bill, it's because I say that the Democrats should have built a statue to Pat Toomey, because without him, there would have been no health care bill. That at every step of the way, when there were opportunities to improve it, Republicans rejected it, betting on defeating it, and they did not defeat it. It's here, and it's here in all of its awfulness from a conservative point of view. And so don't tell me about the intensity of your emotions when your methodology has led to this disaster. I think if the Republicans had followed my advice, yes, Obamacare would be the law. It's the law now, but it would be a very different kind of bill, much better from a conservative point of view. And now conservatives have the task of passing a repeal through the House of Representatives, passing it with 60 votes past the filibuster of the Senate, winning a presidential election, and finding a president who will sign it. I mean, it's just impossible. It's here. And the people who told us how passionately opposed to it they were are the people who brought it here.
Bingham, New York, Kelly on our Democrats line.
Yes, good morning. Mr. Frum and Mr. Galston appear to be the only sane people left in America, and you can tell from the polarized nature of the calls. People are attacking the idea, attacking what Frum's done before. That doesn't move America forward. And that's the gridlock we're facing in this country. When you have countries like China, India, Singapore zooming past the United States, it makes me very hopeless for the future if this kind of thing is going to continue. And I just hope American people can educate themselves and figure out a way to love each other and do the right thing for this country. Thank you very much.
Caller, before you go, what would you like to see come out of it, specifically?
Well, I'd like to see more people pay attention to it and stop clinging themselves to certain media that give misinformation for capital reasons. There are millionaires spreading a bunch of misinformation, want to continue to get a crowd they're getting, and keep spilling misinformation, and people keep listening to them. When are they going to pick up a book? When are they going to read something from a different idea and start figuring out what's going on?
Mr. Galston.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. And, do we have a movement for you, sir? But on a more serious note, I think your last comment is really on to something. And that is that for good or for ill, the change in the media and information landscape over the past 3 decades has made it more and more possible for people to live in a world of information and opinion that reinforces and hardens their own prejudices. And that is making it harder and harder to have the kind of conversation that we need to have. David Frum, a few minutes ago, referred to the now vanished era where the 3 networks and the nightly news shows really dominated the information flow. That era wasn't all good, but it did require people to participate in a common pool of information. And it did make it possible for the country to have a more robust political discussion that was more center-seeking than the discussion that we now have. The problem with these niche markets is that they are echo chambers reinforcing rather than challenging the opinions that viewers and listeners bring to them. And that is not a problem for which I have a solution, because the change in the media landscape is a product of decades of technological development, decades of legal development that have opened up markets. The media, like airlines, are much less regulated than they were 30 years ago, and the proliferation and diversity is a consequence. There are many advantages to that. As David Frum said a few minutes ago, people who are avid consumers of information have a lot more of it available than they did 30 years ago, but people who are more casual or narrower simply have their own views reinforced, and that is a problem for our democracy.
So, and my response to that is that's my work, is to try to counteract this game by joining it. I mean, I run a site, we try to offer something that is a little bit broader, and I'll invite the caller to take a look at it.
Also invite the viewers at home if they want. NoLabels.org is the website that.
I was actually promoting my own, but
nice try, David.
From Forum, but I'll visit No Labels too.
You saw it on the TV there, but if they go to this site, what information can they find, and what do you offer folks as far as the site is concerned?
Well, they find out what No Labels is about. They find out how they can get involved. Those are the two most critical things. And they also have a steady flow of information, commentary from different points of view. We're trying to build that up, make it more robust. We don't have a lot in the way of resources, which means we don't have all of the bells and whistles that people have become accustomed to, but the basics are there. And it's like the old folk story with a pot of water bubbling in the middle of the town square. The stew is going to be as good as the meat, the vegetables, the condiments, and the spices that the American people bring to it.
For those who have already joined and identified themselves with your group, is there a breakdown yet of how they break down Republican, Democrat, Independent?
We don't have the demographics on that yet, but obviously before we get too far into 2011, we'll start to have a better feel. I can tell you this, there was a very healthy mix in New York for our launch event, on the stage and in the seats. And we were not one thing or the other, we were everything, which is exactly what we want to be.
And you'll stay decentralized? That means there won't be any larger events like the ones you had in New York going forward, or?
There will be state and local events, but frankly, national events are not what we're about. If this isn't a grassroots movement, it isn't a movement. And if it's not a movement, then all it is a few people sitting in Washington hoping for something better.
Al in Texas on our independent line. Kay, go ahead.
Thank you. Pedro, please don't cut me off until I get my points made, please.
Well, we've got a few minutes left, so go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. Right now, the calls are, well, there's 8 called for, 1 Twitter for, and mine for seeing through what these people are all about. And I commend all my people from Michigan, Wisconsin, Susan on the Twitter, Mississippi, and the article from Mr. Rich. I didn't count that. So that's 11 now.
Your point, please.
My point is these people are social engineering.
And we'll leave it there.
I don't think I'm social engineering.
Mr. Galston?
I've been called a lot of things. Social engineer? I don't think so. We're trying to start a citizens movement. That's not social engineering. That's grassroots American politics. And if I'm being accused of participating in grassroots American politics, I've got to plead guilty. That's what I'm doing. But I've said probably 3 or 4 times in the course of this hour, and we'll say for the 4th or the 5th time, this movement is what citizens who are not satisfied with the current condition of our nation's politics are going to make of it. I have my own ideas. I don't expect those ideas to be adopted. I hope that they'll be discussed, but I hope a lot of other ideas are going to be discussed too. That's not social engineering, that's democracy. Welcome to it.
Speaking of grassroots politics, you have a chance to see the No Labels National Leadership Meeting with Mayor Cory Booker of Newark. That will be aired Friday at 8:15 in the evening. And if you want to see more about the No Labels organization, this is a discussion, an organizing meeting of the No Labels political group. But you can see more about it and what it's about. Again, we invite you to view that 8:15 this coming Friday. Also, if you want to check out their website, once again, nolabels.org, which we have hyperlinked to our C-SPAN website. Mr. Frum and Mr. Galston, thanks for your time today.
Well, thank you, Pedro.
Coming up.